agenda, a very full one, and little time this morning. So let me suggest that we get going and people will start coming in the room. Also, we will be webcasting, so for the benefit of those that are not with us here, I will introduce the panel and then get going as fast as we can so that we can cover the very rich agenda again that we have with us. So my name is Ricardo Melendez-Ortiz. I'm the head of the International Center for Trade and Sustainable Development. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to this dialogue. We're co-organizing this dialogue with the Energy Charter Treaty Secretariat, if I get that correct, with whom we have been working on issues related to trade and energy now for a number of years. Today, what we'd like to do is sort of do a check on where we are, on what we call the evolving landscape of clean energy governance, particularly focus on what we could call governance gaps. As you all know, there is no global framework that regulates energy, specifically trade and investment, but there are plurilateral arrangements that do so. At the level of the WTO, you have a large number of provisions that deal with questions related with international trade in energy, international trade in technologies related to energy, as well as with respect to services associated with energy, including the provision of electricity. But for a number of years, we have been looking more closely at the questions of the frameworks on international trade and investment and the energy challenges, not least because of the context in which we have been living in the past few years. The question of energy security has always been very high in the agenda of any societies, but we have now gone through questions of resource scarcity, issues related to the pursuit of a low-carbon economy, the very good knowledge that we now have about the contribution of the energy sector to the problem of climate change, and then the need to act on that question specifically, as well as, obviously, with that, now the emergence in a very dynamic way of what we can generally refer to as clean energy technologies. Going forward, from an ICTSD perspective, we look at demographics, we look at demand for energy, we look at the situation of distribution of resources, but also with respect to access to energy. Just yesterday, I was looking at some report that talks about the differences in average electricity consumption per capita by country, where we have a really a very impressive really inequity, if you like, with respect to that consumption. So while we have countries with a consumption per capita of 30,000 or more kilowatt hours, we have other countries that are at about 30 per year, and low middle income countries at around 600 and so on. Very large countries also at around 600 kilowatts per hour. So very big differences in consumption today that have to do with the access, that have to do with the need for very large investments in energy going forward. With demographics, population growth, but also changes in habits, we expect this demand to continue to grow. Again, in a context where we would be searching for low carbon alternatives to energy provision. In the past few years, as I said, at ICTSD, we've been doing a great deal of research on the question of how to scale up the use of renewable energies particularly. We find that, again, in the frameworks of trade and investment, there remain a number of areas where the work of governments to make these frameworks more enabling will make a big difference, particularly with respect to, for instance, the access, the market access conditions for clean energy technologies. There's a very good initiative, as you may know, at the plurilateral level within the WTO to negotiate an environmental goods agreement, which is ongoing, that covers that question of market access for an important segment of those technologies, but it's obviously not yet comprehensive from that perspective. It also stops there on market access. But there are also issues related to non-tariff barriers, the questions of standards, either the lack or weakness of standards for installers of clean energy equipment, for instance, in many countries, or the lack of harmonized or mutually recognized standards with respect to the equipment that has to cross borders. Issues related to clean energy subsidies. There's been a discussion in the past few years that has been energized, in a way, if you like, by cases in real life that have to do with policy space available to governments to enable clean energy scale-up. Issues related to procurement practices, rules governing services, subsidies, and the whole more complex conundrum of issues that have to do with the way in which, through value chains, these technologies are now put together today, involving the cross-border trade in goods, some of which contain services embedded in them to make them really useful, but and then investments, intellectual property, knowledge. So we live in that fragmented world in a way of production, where again the rules on the international trade and investment will be determinant on the possibilities to scale up this use of renewable energies. But in the bigger picture, again, which I expect that we will be talking about today as well, there is the question of generally of energy goods crossing borders, transiting to other countries, the issue of cross-border transmission of electricity, including renewable electricity, which has become a big challenge on which countries are currently acting. The proposals on what is called a global grid that could allow for efficiencies and for the access to energy in remote sites. And so all that problematic against, again, the current frameworks on trade and investment is what keeps us interested in these topics. Today, we have a panel where we have invited really the leaders of top institutions or key institutions working in this space. We're very privileged to have with us Roberto Azevedo, the Director General of the WTO, who would make some remarks now. And I know Roberto has to leave to another meeting soon, so I will be turning the floor to him as soon as possible. Then we will have an introduction on the new upcoming International Energy Charter, so the expansion of the Energy Charter to a global program, a global proposal on we'll hear both from the Secretary General of the Energy Charter Secretariat, as well as from Ambassador Selim Kuneralp, who is the Deputy Secretary General of the Energy Charter Secretariat and a well-known also international trade expert. Then we will go into some discussion on stakeholder needs in terms of energy governance, for which we have invited Dr. Howard Chase, Chairman of the Industry Advisory Panel of the Energy Charter, and Christoph Frei, the Secretary General of the World Energy Council. The World Energy Council is the entity that really brings together all forms of energy every 3 years in its World Energy Assembly. And we'll then finalize the presentations with Joakim Reiter, the Deputy Secretary General of UNCTAD, who will be joining us in a moment. So I will try to be very efficient in providing the floor to our speakers and not use too much time in introductions. You have with you the bios of the speakers, as well as in the website you will find all the information on them and the organizations. So with this, let me turn the floor then to Roberto Azevedo, so that we can listen to him and the presentation from the International Energy Charter before you have to take off. Roberto, you have the floor.
Thank you. I start by apologizing by having to leave right after my speech. I have another appointment at 10:45, which I cannot delay, unfortunately. I hope that I will be getting reports on your work. This is extremely important, and I want to follow it up as much as possible. So let me start by thanking everybody, Ricardo, Melendez-Ortiz, CEO of the ICTSD, the Secretary General Rusnak, Deputy Secretary General Kuneralp, the fellow speakers at the table for coming and joining us, all of you for being here. So, like I said, I'm truly delighted to be here, and this is, in my view, a very important event. We're talking today about how we can work together to improve global governance on clean energy. And in terms of global governance, I think that 2015 is going to be a very important year. At the WTO, we are clearly, right now, I wonder whether you have seen the signs, we're celebrating our 20th anniversary, and members are implementing the decisions and the package that we agreed on in the Bali Ministerial Conference, and we are now engaged in very intensive negotiations which will lead up to our ministerial conference in Nairobi, our 10th ministerial conference in Nairobi. And of course, at the Energy Charter itself, I know that you're going to be very busy too, not least as you will be holding your ministerial conference in The Hague in May. So, of course, beyond our work, there are many other major milestones, such as the UN's summit on the post-2015 development agenda. That's in September. There will be the UN Climate Change Conference in Paris in December, just before our own ministerial conference. So, with all this in mind, I think this is the perfect moment to be discussing how we can improve global governance for the future, more specifically in the area of clean energy. And I would like to use this opportunity to focus on what we can do together to contribute to a better trading environment for energy, and specifically for clean energy. So there is no question, of course, that energy is essential for trade and economic development. Access to affordable energy gives certainty to business, enhances production, provides incentives for technological progress, and facilitates transportation. And these are very important factors for increasing competitiveness in global markets and boosting the sluggish economic growth that we see today. However, there are many challenges ahead of us and in ensuring that these benefits are realized. First and obvious one is that energy markets are highly concentrated, both in terms of market structure and geographical distribution of resources. Another important factor is that demand is rising in the developing countries, particularly in Asia, Latin America, the Middle East, Africa, and there are huge gaps in provision. I take the example of sub-Saharan Africa, where 2 of every 3 people do not have access to electricity. And we are talking here, and this is according to the International Energy Agency, this is just about 13% of the world population. At the same time, renewable energy forms only a small part of the global energy mix. It is true that renewables such as, for example, hydropower or onshore wind are increasing their presence in the global energy markets, but fossil fuels still represent around 80% of the total market share. So, of course, also oil prices fell by almost 50% last year, and we are likely to see a rise in the medium term. Therefore, the task of increasing the share of renewables in the energy mix is going to get tougher. More than that, the high volatility of energy prices can make it very difficult also for investors to plan renewable energy projects. Now, by creating a better environment for trading energy, I think that we can help to support access to energy and clean energy again specifically. So I think that both the Energy Charter and the WTO have an important role to play. The Energy Charter is the only energy-specific agreement that covers all major aspects of international energy, from trade and transit to investment and energy efficiency. Our two organizations have a good track record of working together. Many WTO principles are reflected in the Energy Charter itself and its treaty. Indeed, several recently exceeded members and also members who are now in the process of acceding and joining the WTO have signed the Energy Charter Treaty to mark their commitment to apply WTO rules in the energy sector. And I think that the current moves towards an updated Energy Charter mapping out the common principles for international cooperation are very positive and very welcome at this point. So I'm very keen that we should seek to further strengthen our dialogue and our cooperation. Turning now to the WTO a little bit, the WTO has very significant interests in energy. I think that's quite obvious, but our history shows that it has not always been easy to really work with this issue within the organization. Even back in 1947, the original text of the Havana Charter for an international trade organization contained rules on trade and investment in energy specifically. And those rules dealt with regulating production and with the control of exports and imports of primary resources. Moreover, it included the principles of freedom of transit of goods, including energy. Now, that vision, of course, you all know, of an international trade organization could not be fully realized at that time. So instead, we had the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which was signed and which contained only general rules for trade in goods. So some wanted to revisit this situation and the issue itself in the 1990s in the discussions on the Uruguay round, which created the WTO. It was suggested that rules on energy should be included in those talks, but there was no consensus at the time. So today, the WTO does not have specific rules dealing with trade in energy. However, the rule book, so all the disciplines, the legal texts that we have applying here in the WTO, it does cover trade in goods, services, and trade-related intellectual property rights. And there, I think it captures a multitude of the elements of trade in energy. So some steps also to include energy-specific commitments have been taken in services schedules of members. So, for example, 19 members have commitments on services incidental to energy distribution in their schedules of concessions here in the WTO. And 12 members have commitments on pipeline transportation of fuels. So as I have indicated, some of our recently acceded members have incorporated also energy-related commitments to their protocols of accession. The WTO dispute settlement system has addressed several energy-related disputes and on renewables. In addition to all that, an effective intellectual property regime can facilitate investment and development of new technologies that are critical to the expansion of renewables and to ensure access to energy infrastructure. More than that, our rules on subsidies, for example, local content requirements, and state trading enterprises are also very relevant and very present in the energy sector. So a closer look at the landscape of policies in the energy sector shows that many trade restrictions are still in place. And they range from export restrictions to some labeling requirements on energy products. The WTO, of course, provides transparency mechanisms that can help members to improve their understanding of the links and interactions between trade and energy. And through all of these avenues, I think energy issues are increasingly becoming a part of the WTO's day-to-day work. And some elements are also present in our current negotiating agenda, elements, but not energy specific. So our successful Bali Ministerial Conference in 2013 delivered a real boost to our negotiations. In January, we launched an intensive process of negotiations here to agree by July, this July, a work program to conclude the remaining issues of the Doha Development Agenda. And moving this work forward would have several implications in the energy sector. But moreover, more than anything, it would free up the WTO's agenda for the first time in a generation. And this would enable us to look at a range of new issues, and energy-specific issues, I think, could be there. So far, we have seen a pretty good progress and strong engagement on the part of members, but of course, there's still a long way to go. The Doha mandate includes opening trade on environmental goods and services, and Ricardo mentioned that just a moment ago. Many of the goods and services discussed by members in these negotiations have direct application to clean energy and energy efficiency. They include goods like solar panels, solar water heaters, hydropower turbines, equipment for biogas production, and services like environmental consulting. So collective elimination or reduction of the trade barriers here would provide WTO members with greater access to a variety of imported goods involving clean energy technologies and some of the services which support them. So this work could also help to stimulate innovation and facilitate the development of clean energy industries, including in countries where they do not yet exist, allowing for new green business opportunities to flourish. So in July of last year, a group of members launched a process to eliminate tariffs on environmental goods. These members account for over 85% of global environmental goods trade, and we expect that this process will cover many goods with a direct application to clean energy and energy efficiency. And this is a significant initiative which clearly would bring very important economic gains. And more importantly, even though this initiative is being carried out by a group, not all WTO countries, but by a group of countries, the results of these negotiations the benefits from it would apply to all WTO members. So they would be, in our jargon here, MFN, so on the most favored nation basis. So in conclusion, I think that there is a huge amount of interesting work going on in this area. I see several areas where we can look to do more and where our organizations can work even more closely together to improve governance. And by doing so, I think that we can potentially help to address some of the outstanding issues in the sector, particularly the need to access to energy and the need for greater emphasis on sustainability. So this could help to boost trade, safeguard the environment as well, and to improve lives. So you are going to have a very important meeting as far as we see it. I hope that it is productive, that it is successful. Like I said before, I'm looking forward to receiving the reports on your discussions here. And I hope, again, that we can collaborate ever more closely on these issues on years to come. So thank you very much for listening, and have good work.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Azevedo. We'll go directly to Urban Rusnak, see if you can still be with us during the presentation of the International Energy Charter. But we know that you have to move at one point. But thank you for those messages. I think they're very well received, and we know that there is a great deal of work going forward, and we intend to contribute to that. I'll turn the floor to Urban Rusnak. Then, Urban, if you'd like to take the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen, Director General Azevedo, Mr. Melendez-Ortiz, thank you very much for your nice welcoming word and for opening remarks of this today conference. I would also like to add some brief remarks on my own on behalf of the Energy Charter. Firstly, of course, thanks to the International Center for Trade and Sustainable Development for working with the Energy Charter Secretariat on convening this policy dialogue here in Geneva today. This is a welcome and timely opportunity to discuss the changing landscape of energy governance, a topic that is of great personal interest to me and, of course, great relevance to the Energy Charter process. I would also like to thank WTO and particularly the Director General, Mr. Azevedo, for his participation in the opening of today's conference. As we will discuss later, the Energy Charter plays an important complementary role to the WTO in the energy sphere. Deputy Secretary General of the Energy Charter, Ambassador Selim Kuneralp, will outline to you later how our efforts at the moment are very much focused on the International Energy Charter, a new political declaration on energy cooperation, which is due to be adopted in The Hague on May 2021. Much of the motivation of the potential new members of the International Energy Charter comes from their belief that broader energy cooperation is required for economic progress and more generally for social development and the elevation of the energy poverty, all of which should be lead to the better quality of life. The International Energy Charter set out common principles for international cooperation and common areas in cooperation in the field of energy. In particular, the new charter focuses on the need for action in A, development of trade and energy consistent with the major relevant multilateral agreement as WTO agreement and its related instruments, and B, for the practical cooperation in energy field. In focusing on those two objectives, particular attention is to be given to the open and competitive markets for energy products, protection investment, access to energy resources, transparency of international energy markets, the renewal of technical, administrative, and other barriers to trade in energy and associated equipment. The importance of promoting the realization of the infrastructure projects and promoting best possible access to capital is also recognized. The International Energy Charter recognizes also and reinforces the sovereignty over the natural resources, and as a document is technologically neutral. The adoption of the IEC as a ministerial conference in The Hague in May will therefore be a great opportunity to develop the global energy governance architecture. It's my firm belief that the Energy Charter has a potential to be a key component of the global energy architecture, which is so required to meet the challenges of the 21st century. This morning's discussion promises to be interesting and informative, and again, I would like to thank to all of the speakers, and I will give the floor back to the chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Urban. I'll turn the floor to Ambassador Selim Kuneralp now. Selim.
Thank you very much, Ricardo, and ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for being here. In particular, Roberto, I'm very grateful that you've been able to spare the time to be with us today, and of course we thank you also for your extremely positive remarks on cooperation between the Energy Charter and the WTO, and So we look forward to this cooperation continuing in the future. And speaking personally, I'm very happy to be back in this room where in the past I spent many fruitful hours in a different capacity, and I hope that you will all find today's meeting useful and productive from your own perspectives. The Secretary General of our organization, Dr. Rusnak, has already spoken of the role of the Energy Charter. My task is to outline a little bit more in detail the different nature of the Energy Charter Treaty and how the Energy Charter relates to the WTO, and then I will speak of the new International Energy Charter which will be formally adopted at this conference in May that has already been referred to. When you look at the origins of our organization, they go back to the early 1990s, namely the end of the Cold War. And that was a very important and historic period for Europe in general, but the whole world, because it coincided. It was the end of the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the subsequent dissolution of the Soviet Union, which brought fundamental change in European and world politics. The idea of the Energy Charter was proposed by the then Dutch Prime Minister, Mr. Ruud Lubbers, on the basis of the principle that the best way to help the countries of the former Soviet Union would be to establish a cycle of economic activity and investment with them. He proposed that the best place to start was the energy sector, because there was a natural complementarity between the very large energy resources of the East and the resources of industrial strength, technology and investment funds that existed in the West. And it was this initiative that led to the signing of the European Energy Charter, a political declaration, a non-binding political declaration, in The Hague in December 1991. The Energy Charter of 1991 represents a political commitment to cooperate in the energy sector between the countries of the European Community and those of the former Soviet Union. The Charter provides for joint activities such as coordination of energy policies, facilitation of exchange of technology information, energy efficiency and environmental protection, as well as the development of renewable energy resources. The Charter of 1991 also emphasized the need for the establishment of an appropriate international legal framework for energy cooperation between the participants. And this Energy Charter Treaty, which arose out of this exercise, was signed in 1994, and unlike the charter, the original charter, the treaty is a legally binding document, an agreement on energy trade, transit, and the promotion and protection of investment. There are more than 50 contracting parties to the treaty, including each of the member states of the European Union, the countries of the former Soviet Union, but also other countries, including Australia, Japan, Norway, Switzerland, and Turkey. The constituency of the Energy Charter also includes the countries of Central Asia, who are of growing significance to Europe's energy needs, such as Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan. The essence of the treaty is how to reduce investment risk. There are important provisions on investment promotion and protection, trade and transit, and dispute settlement and energy efficiency. The development of the energy resources of the Caspian and Caucasus regions owes much to those countries' membership of the Energy Charter. The rules of the treaty, as has already been said by Director General Azevedo, were inspired by the standards for trade developed in the GATT, which is now, of course, the WTO. The Energy Charter Treaty contains, however, certain additional elements. And to repeat what has been said by by Director General Azevedo, the WTO does not have specific rules for the energy sector, but the legal framework of the WTO includes a number of rules that are also applicable to the trade in energy-related products and equipment. But for countries who are already WTO members, the Energy Charter Treaty brings additional and more specific advantages. For those charter contracting parties who are not yet members of the WTO, such as Belarus, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan, the purpose of the Energy Charter trade regime is to extend the benefits and the obligations of WTO membership to their energy sector. In practice, in practice, this extension means that trade in the energy sector between WTO and non-WTO members that are parties to the Energy Charter Treaty are the same as those that apply between members of the WTO. So the non-WTO members that are parties to the Energy Charter Treaty are treated as WTO members from that perspective. So in order to achieve this, the Energy Charter Treaty has incorporated those rules of the GATT that are relevant to the energy sector. And as a result, the treaty serves as a stepping stone to WTO accession. The ECT might also be considered as having a so-called WTO plus effect. This is because Article 7 of the ECT, which relates to transit, as compared with Article 5 of the WTO, takes into consideration specific measures for transit in energy. Article 7 explicitly includes energy transport facilities, such as gas pipelines and electricity transmission grids, as means of transport. Before the entry into force of the ECT in 1998, the international rules applicable to transit were those that were included in Article 5 of the GATT. Article 5 of the GATT enshrines the principle of non-discrimination towards goods in transit. With rapidly increasing energy transit flows over recent decades, transit transactions have become more complex, in particular with respect to fees for services that are provided and to transit routes. It therefore became apparent that in the specific context of energy transit, Article 5 of GATT could not solve all of the related problems. More detailed rules were required to ensure transit on reasonable terms. Such rules were developed through the Energy Charter Treaty. The treaty transit provisions build upon the non-discrimination principle of Article 5 of GATT. The aim of the provisions included in Article 7 of the treaty is to provide for a balance between the sovereign interests of states and the need for security and stability of transit. The transit provisions of the treaty confirm the principles of non-discrimination with regard to access to energy resources and markets. The important new element contained in the treaty is the explicit coverage of grid-bound energy transport and the enforceability of its provisions. A number of countries who previously had not participated in any international transit arrangement have now, through the ECT, access to multilaterally accepted rules that can be used to protect their interests. Another complementary effect of the Energy Charter trade regime is that the contracting parties to the treaty mandated the negotiation of a plurilateral agreement on customs tariffs. However, in order not to add unnecessary duplication, the Charter decided to support the environmental goods agreement negotiations within the WTO by raising awareness among its constituency and by providing technical advice for negotiating members on concrete items to be included under the EGA. By promoting the facilitation of trade in environmental goods and by extending the ECT trade regime to energy equipment, the Energy Charter promotes the export and transfer of technology from developed countries to energy-producing emerging economies in need of such technology. A move from fossil energy sources towards low-carbon renewables is one of the best means to reduce carbon emissions. Whereas renewable sources such as energy from wind or sun is free of charge, exploitation is expensive and requires complex technology and expertise, and of course a lot of investment. As for investment protection, the treaty was inspired by the best practices of the OECD on investment protection. Even today, the Energy Charter Treaty remains unique as the only multilaterally legally binding treaty on energy, as has already been mentioned by Director General Azevedo. Now let me also mention that the Energy Charter Treaty is accompanied by a protocol on energy efficiency and related environmental aspects, which we call the PIRA. The protocol was negotiated, opened for signature, and entered into force at the same time as the treaty, namely on the 16th of April 1998. PIRA represents a clear expression by all participating governments of the necessity and the value of a binding document to focus efforts to tap the potential of energy efficiency as a concrete policy approach. PIRA also provides a mechanism for international cooperation and exchange of experience and ideas between countries with economies in transition and countries with 20 years or more experience in the area of energy efficiency. The protocol defines policy principles for the promotion of energy efficiency. It provides a framework for the development of cooperative and coordinated action. It provides guidelines on the development of energy efficiency programs. And lastly, it indicates areas of possible cooperation. At the time of signing this instrument, the protocol was pioneering in the area of energy efficiency. It thus exemplifies the environmental aspects of the Energy Charter. Now, a few words on energy security and the different meanings that it may have, because they very much depend on your perspective. Within the Energy Charter, which brings together producing, consuming, and transit countries, we're well aware of these different perspectives. For energy-consuming countries, security of supply is the main concern, while producing countries are more concerned with security of demand. The Energy Charter Treaty also attempts to provide for security of transit. And finally, for energy-poor countries, energy security is the elimination of energy poverty. Energy supply interruptions affect entire sectors of the economy and the security of millions of people. Governments therefore dream of energy self-sufficiency. Because of that, they often give priority to the exploitation of their sovereign natural resources. For many years, some governments have invested in nuclear power plants, while others seek to develop renewable energy sources like wind and sun. In fact, it can be both. This is a realistic and practical approach. It has economic benefits, as energy produced domestically does not need to be transported over long distances. Moreover, energy supplies are then less dependent on foreign relations and on the pricing mechanisms determined by the producer. But this may not always be a better option compared to international trade in energy. The mutual benefits of international trade are well known from economic theory. Energy is, of course, a commodity that is traded. Oil is the commodity with the largest trade volume worldwide. For the consuming country, even if it has its own resources, it is often more economical to import primary energy sources such as oil, gas and coal, rather than exploiting its own such resources. And then, of course, you have the producing countries. They have a clear interest to use revenue from traded energy materials and products for the economic and technological development of their nations. The concept of security of demand is a challenging one in a market economy. In the Energy Charter, we understand it as not excluding long-term contractual relations. And there is another factor that makes energy different. The transport of energy requires specific infrastructures such as pipelines, terminals, and grids. Access to such infrastructure is a sensitive issue both for energy producers and for energy consumers. This is a business that is highly capital intensive. But grid construction is a very expensive part of the energy value chain and therefore needs special attention from governments and regulators. In the Energy Charter, we have special provisions on transit, which go beyond Article 5 of GATT, as I said earlier. Now, the Energy Charter also promotes access to international markets on commercial terms and development of an open and competitive markets for energy materials, products, and energy-related equipment. 2/3 of what is imported to the European Union common market is raw materials, energy, parts and components. Nowadays, whether markets are open depends not only on what happens at the border, but on thousands of policy choices made all across government. All these choices can affect trade in energy and energy security of the country. The rules we establish to protect foreign investments determines their flows and consequently economic prosperity. The rules that we set that decide what products are polluting and what products are economically friendly, environmentally friendly, have a similar impact, such as in the context of the Environmental Goods Agreement. Each of these decisions requires any government to strike a balance between its potential economic, environmental, social, and security impacts. In future, trade will only become more important. Yet 90% of future global growth is projected to happen outside Europe's borders. Therefore, a multilateral rather than a bilateral system for trade is required. In the energy sector, that is the role that can be played by the Energy Charter. Now, Mr. Howard Chase, who is chair of the Industry Advisory Panel and who will be speaking later this morning, is also present, as I said, chair of this panel, which is a consultative body which was established to build on existing contacts with industry and to strengthen the dialogue with the private sector. The IAP was encouraged by the Energy Charter to participate in public consultations launched by the European Commission on TTIP, for instance, on an individual basis. Moreover, one of the IAP meetings last year was organized in Washington under the auspices of the US Chamber of Commerce, and another meeting is set to be held soon in China. That meeting was a policy platform to reflect on the US-EU energy relations and experiences of the Energy Charter related to energy investment protection in the context of ongoing transatlantic negotiations. Now, I've spoken quite a lot about the past, but let me now turn to the future, and that is the need to update the Energy Charter of 1991. This process began in 2009 to enable the Energy Charter to go beyond its former Eurasian context, because of course the principles that the Charter stand for are universal and are not limited to any particular region of the world. This process envisaged removing barriers faced by potential candidates for accession to the treaty. This included, for instance, looking at the outdated references contained in the 1991 Energy Charter to the Soviet Union and to the old General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs. The Energy Charter Conference, the decision-making body of the Energy Charter, decided in 2012 to start negotiations to forge a new political declaration. This came to be known as the Warsaw Process, because it was started in Warsaw. The objective was to strengthen the profile of the Energy Charter and the treaty as a framework for international cooperation at international level. There is also the objective of promoting the accession of new countries and active cooperation within the framework of the Charter. Late last year, after 4 rounds of negotiations that were held in Brussels, delegations from over 80 countries were involved with the members of the existing Energy Charter, to which were joined representatives of a total of 28 observer and outreach countries. And by engaging non-members in negotiations on a basic document on energy cooperation, the members of the treaty demonstrated their openness to reach out to new partners on all continents and to promote the existing principles of the Charter. China was not involved in the 1991 negotiations, but it was represented and actively participated in those negotiations in 2014. In late October, agreement was reached on the text of what is known as the 2015 International Energy Charter, again a political declaration like the 1991. The text of the 2015 International Energy Charter, some of whose copies are available for those of you who are interested, sets out agreed principles on international energy cooperation. The new text has been stripped of its outdated elements. It identifies current and future energy challenges, and new elements have been incorporated mostly by potential new members such as China, Iran, and Morocco. Key new points of emphasis include the importance of access to energy and the importance of renewable energy. At the same time, the principles from 1991 are still deemed to be relevant and are maintained. The expectation is that the new charter will do justice to the importance of energy security for producing, consuming, and energy charter countries in a balanced manner. There is now every reason to believe that the Warsaw Process will be successfully completed at the ministerial conference that is going to be held in The Hague on 21 May 2015, and that will be known as The Hague II. The International Energy Charter will be the key instrument to support the geographical expansion of the Charter of the organization, I should say. For many countries, signing the political declaration will be the first step towards closer relations and possible accession to the Energy Charter Treaty. And this will, of course, open up new opportunities for investors from the Energy Charter member states to invest in energy production, generation, and transportation in such countries. So I hope that this presentation has enhanced your understanding of the Energy Charter, and particularly that we have been able to underline the parallelism that exists between the WTO and the Energy Charter, and the complementarity that exists between these two institutions. And of course, we are quite happy to try to answer any questions that you may have in the next part of the meeting. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Kuneralp. I'm looking at the agenda and time, and while I was rushing, as you saw this morning, because the DG had to leave, and then you get press, but we are actually ahead of time. So I'm hesitating whether to open the floor at this stage, or rather, I think we may be, in a better position to have a discussion if we first listen to Howard Chase and Christoph Frei, and then open the floor. So I think with your permission, and obviously if I'm authorized by my colleague Ingrid Jego, who's really organizing this, I would do that. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay, so why don't we do that? If you're ready, Christoph. All right. We rather go through your presentations efficiently, and then we open the floor to a good exchange with the audience. So I think you'd like to stay, Howard. So please, you have the floor.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And thank you for the kind invitation to speak this morning, and also not least to Ambassador Kuneralp for his words as well. As mentioned in the conference papers, I spent most of my career in the oil and gas business for BP as an engineer and commercial manager, and for the last 20 or more years in government affairs. I was just reflecting that my chairman during that time was quite a well-known official of the GATT and WTO, probably sat in the same chair here from time to time. But my experiences from the Soviet Union, Russia, Azerbaijan, to Angola, Algeria, then Washington, D.C. and Brussels left me with great memories, many friends, and a real conviction that the right deal has to work for all the stakeholders involved. In the last 3 years, I've also been fortunate to shift my perspective from a primary energy producer to a primary energy and hydrocarbon consumer. As you can imagine, it's been quite an educational experience, and maybe I can give a few brief facts to illustrate the point. My present company, Dow Chemical Company, purchases and consumes the equivalent of about 1% of global oil production every day in the form of oil and gas liquids and natural gas equivalent. In electricity in Germany, for example, we are the largest single purchaser of domestic electricity after the Deutsche Bahn, again purchasing around 1% of all German electricity. We like to say with some justification that 95% of everything that's made is made from the primary products of the chemical industry, i.e. essentially from ethylene, propylene and chlorine. These products drive immense value chains downstream through large, medium and small enterprises into every corner of our economies. We and our customers develop and market many of the innovative solutions that we need for a more sustainable future. I could just mention thermal insulation, water purification, disease-resistant crops, lightweight, high-strength materials for transport. Interestingly, a large proportion of the high-strength material that's needed for windmill blades for wind power generation is made by my company. And a high proportion of the advanced heat transfer fluids that you need for industrial scale solar power generation is made by Dow Chemical. So I just want to illustrate the size and scale of complexity of industrial value creation and innovation that flows down from primary energy availability. It's a crucial reminder that the value of energy lies not only in its production and distribution, but also in the vast range of goods, products and services that energy makes possible. I've also been fortunate for the last decade to chair, as Ambassador Kuneralp mentioned, the industry advisory panel of the Energy Charter Treaty. It's a voluntary group. It's designed to give representative advice from across all sections of the energy industry. That includes, of course, exploration, production and transportation, but also electricity generation, including from renewables and nuclear, energy technology and finance, and end-user processing and consumption. Our members are currently drawn from over 30 countries, and our advice is always given on the basis of expertise and consensus. And I'm pleased to say that the industry panel has, of course, been a consistent supporter of the value and importance of the Energy Charter principles. We strongly support the continuing work to broaden the Charter constituency and wish great success to the founding conference of the International Energy Charter next month in The Hague. Moving on to stakeholders, I must say it's actually a real pleasure to be given a speaking title that frames exactly what I would like to say anyway. So thank you to the organisers for that. Who are the key energy stakeholders and what do they need? My opening remarks, of course, have already given a big clue. It's slightly unfashionable perhaps, but we should start with the energy consumers. We should not lose sight of the obvious. For the general public, energy is indispensable to comfort, health and mobility. And for industry, energy is a crucial driver of competitiveness, employment, innovation and investment. For all these customers, lower cost is better than higher cost, reliability is better than intermittency, and cleaner energy is better than dirtier energy. It's simple enough to say, but it's enormously complex to achieve in practice. So how can we resolve all these complexities and make progress towards the common good? Now, happily, of course, we don't have to resolve all these ourselves. We have a mechanism to do this. If we let it work, it can do it very well, and it's called the market. It's not a secret. And if we let it work, it can operate and produce surprisingly good results. I'm really quite encouraged by many recent developments in energy and look forward to Christopher's comments as well. Fundamentally, we've seen that excessive natural resource rents are not sustainable forever. In the end, you need to be the lowest cost and most efficient producer in your class. And it's a lesson that should not be lost in the European context as you move towards the Urals and beyond. We've seen that producers will respond to market pressures and drive down the break-even costs of production if they are put in this position. It should not remotely surprise anyone that this has been a response of the US shale, gas and oil industry to lower prices. Confirms my view that the US shale industry, oil and gas, has already settled to become a permanent fixture in the global energy picture. And that continues to throw down the opportunity and the challenge to other shale-rich locations. And it confirms that there is no shortage of economically recoverable hydrocarbon molecules in the Earth's crust. Peak oil, does anyone remember that, has been replaced, and rightly so, by the economics of marginal cost and marginal price. And I haven't even mentioned the abundance and importance of coal in the world energy economy. We then come, of course, to externalities and to the very real issue of CO2 emissions and greenhouse gas effects. In my view, it makes perfect sense in a market context to try and put a price on those externalities and price those into the market. It makes far less sense to set up a market mechanism such as the emissions trading system in Europe and then complain that it doesn't behave like a tax. If carbon emissions go down in line with targets and the price of carbon goes down with it, that's got to be good news. And it makes no sense at all to provide open-ended subsidies to any form of energy without the incentive for either capital efficiency or rapid convergence to open market prices. Interfering with the market to try and give the answer you want is a predictable recipe for unexpected and often damaging outcomes. So how would I square these observations with other stakeholder interests and the role of the Energy Charter Treaty? If consumers ultimately call the tune in the energy markets, then investors need to read the signals and judge with confidence whether and how they can deliver an appropriate return on their investment. There are at least three obvious points to be made. The first is that energy investments are characteristically long life cycle and long payback in character, typically over periods of 20 years or more. The risks of expropriation and variation of key terms, such as taxation and the ability to remit revenues, have a real impact on the perceived risk and therefore the break-even rate of return. In other words, investment protection over the complete life cycle has a real value to the investor and ultimately, of course, to the customer and the fiscal authority that will benefit from the proceeds of the investment. The second point is that investment is a competitive business. It's competitive both within the firm and external to the firm. Investors can choose to allocate their resources where they see the most attractive fit between commitment and return. Branches of a firm, countries, locations can price themselves in or out of the market through their mix of investment protection and other policies. Now, it's important at this point to emphasize that I'm not arguing that an effective market is an unregulated market. Indeed, far from it. Effective markets need fair, balanced, proportionate, consistent, and effective rules. But I am saying that the quality of regulation has a huge impact on investment attractiveness. Regulation needs to be designed to encourage and reward innovative risk, and not only to safeguard the status quo. Otherwise, investment and eventually growth and employment will leak away to locations where innovation and risk is more welcome. And finally, it's crucial to note that energy investments are almost always network dependent. Primary hydrocarbons, oil and gas, have to be delivered to the market, often thousands of kilometers away, in order to realize the value. And in a similar way, electrons need to flow freely to the point of maximum return in order to realize the optimum value from the investment. So for the consumer, the message is clear. Consumer welfare is best served by maximum connectivity to support market competition. Traditionally, energy producers have often sought to secure and protect value through exclusive transportation arrangements. It's an understandable and maybe justifiable point in the early stages of major resource development. But in the end, it's only market exposure which will successfully sustain the entire value chain over its full cycle, as we've seen time and time again in energy history. So moving finally to energy governance. In my view, at heart, the Energy Charter Treaty is a tool for encouraging and supporting market disciplines in the energy industries. In doing so, it serves the objective not only of investment attractiveness, but the consumer requirement for competitive pricing, secure supply, and cleaner energy. It's not a surprise that the core provisions of the Energy Charter Treaty align strongly with these 3 points. Agreed standards of investment protection help to mitigate investor risk, and equitable procedures for dispute resolution between investors and sovereign states are inseparable from a credible investment protection regime. Now, these procedures are not immune from experience, and there's a good case from time to time for revisiting the detailed provisions. And of course, the availability of recourse to dispute settlement may often be as valuable as the actual procedures. However, the fundamental value of investor-to-state dispute resolution proceedings in attracting and securing investment in a competitive marketplace for me is not in doubt. And finally, the Energy Charter provisions, treaty provisions on transportation and trade in energy continue to provide an important reference point in the crucial business of providing connectivity between energy suppliers and customers. For my part, and more generally amongst industry advisory panel members, we would still like to see the treaty return again substantively to the matter of transit protection and strengthen procedures for addressing transportation and other disputes. However, these are points for debate and improvement, and they only reinforce the underlying value of the treaty framework. And they also give me a good moment to commend the Secretary-General and his team, who have worked tirelessly, not least over recent months, to address some of the really significant challenges to energy security in and around Europe. So I hope I've given you a good, perhaps quite robust view of the value of market mechanisms and good governance in meeting consumer requirements for competitive, reliable and cleaner energy. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Howard. I think that's it's a great complement to the previous presentations. It gives us more material for a good discussion. I'll turn then quickly to Christoph Frei, if I may, and I know that Christoph is going to give us a provocative presentation on the concerns of today on energy markets. So you've got the floor.
Thank you, Chairman. And what I'd like to do is tell you what my conclusions will be, but then lead to there. I will tell you what, on behalf of the World Energy Councils, would be 7 areas that are of critical priority when it comes to enhanced international collaboration and governance. But I'd like to lead there by, first of all, giving you a speed dating sense of what is on the top of the mind of about 1,000 energy leaders in almost 100 countries at the moment. How we see, second point, how we see energy scenarios by 2050 and what kind of needs for governance and action that actually defines. And then quickly dive into what can be done by national governments, and hence where is the gap for international. So this is kind of the 3-step I would like to go through before coming into the 7 areas that I would like to comment for further action. First, let me one word about the organization. We are working with 3,000 organizations in energy, government, private sector in almost 100 countries, including the Chinas, Indias of this world. And as such are the deepest energy network. We have an ongoing studies effort in a number of areas, including rules of trade. We do scenarios and policy studies, and obviously we organize events as well, as has been pointed out at the beginning. Next year again in Istanbul with about 10,000. We have said the digital code of next year's event will be 10,000 people, 100 ministers. The oil price will be 100 again, and it starts the 10th of the 10th in October. That's the digital code of next year's event. But with that brief commercial, let me dive into the 1,000 energy leaders' perception. And keep in mind, those are either CEOs or C-1 or minister -1 person from 80 countries who have responded to it. So you can take this as a pretty robust way of how the energy world looks at critical issues. We do that survey once a year, and hence I invite you to, by the way, we distribute it freely, so you have access to it. The first, what this means, we have 3 dimensions here, uncertainty, impact, and this defines the upper right area as the critical uncertainty space. Is basically the keep me awake at night space for energy leaders around the world. And the 40 issues that are reflected are roughly, when you think about what are drivers, critical uncertainties in energy, key drivers in energy, they should all be here in one or another form, otherwise we are missing out. Now, the top one is obviously energy price volatility, and the key sentence has been, we have the new area is basically, the new normal is high volatility. We have seen high volatility over the past years, collapsing solar prices, oil and gas prices moving around, and obviously collapsing oil prices last year, CO2 price uncertainties. All those uncertainties is the number one issue. Second, climate framework is the number two issue. The uncertainty behind the CO2 price future is obviously of critical importance to energy investors. Electric storage, a first technology issue. The number one uncertainty is actually the electric storage, and you didn't mention chemical industry is obviously also looked at as an industry of hope for in that context. Electric storage can change the outlook for demand behind oil, gas, and obviously make the whole electricity system very different. What are the key action items? It is energy efficiency, renewables. It is bringing down or controlling subsidies in a better way, sunsetting subsidies in a socially acceptable way. It is obviously understanding how China and India affect global markets with their growth and importance, increasing importance. And it's also things like regional interconnection, which is obviously trade relevant as well. Now, let me just point to one technology issue here, and I come back later. CCS, carbon capture and sequestration, is an issue. If you would have observed it over the past year, you would have seen it flying off the map. And I'm just saying this. There's lots of discussion around CCS, and CCS to our, I would say, not pleasure, obviously not pleasure to our shock. We see CCS flying off the map. Nobody believes CCS will deliver a contribution in time, and I'll bring back that back to our scenarios in the second point. So with that, this was the first just brief overview what keeps energy leader most awake at night, and you have seen many of the issues obviously that have come up earlier and that are trade relevant. My second point, how do we view scenarios by 2050, and we differentiate two fundamentally different worlds. We call them jazz and symphony world. One is a top-down orchestrated world where governments take decisions not only on technology selection, they are looking at local resources, they have long-term clearly formulated objectives when it comes to climate change and other key social goods, etc. So that's a symphony orchestrated future, and we have in contrast to that a jazz future where you think government take quite a laid back role when it comes to energy, put such fundamental rules in place, but then let all the markets define technology, etc. And if you think of examples, obviously the Chinese way of taking China out of energy poverty, there is no more energy poverty in the way we knew it before in China. Today was typically a symphony approach. The US shale revolution is a typical jazz result, as just two examples to look at that. And we have taken those two words because they fundamentally distinguish the future of energy in the most significant way, the way how a government approaches energy. Now, the outcomes of the scenarios, and we could have a long scenarios discussion, but the outcome is, and I want to insist on that, first of all, we do not black swan scenarios. We do not assume here a sudden breakthrough in storage or so. We go with the learning curves as we know them. We go with innovation as we know it, in rate of innovation as we know it on the policy and technology side, and that gives us a span of what seems plausible today. That doesn't mean it's a foresight. It seems simply what we know best today. What is the most plausible future in 2050? And what I'm going to show you here, first of all, look at the today basically in the this is the jazz world, symphony world. You have today and then 2050, today and 2050, and it starts with the coal, oil, gas, so the lower three are fossil fuel, and the first message is we have today about 80% of primary energy is fossil. By 2050 it will still be between 60 and 75% of fossil. Now that's again I have clearly stated where this is coming from. You immediately think, well, what the hell, what do we think with the renewables? But renewables, let us look at renewables on the other side. Renewables, we have currently about 15% of renewables. But if you look at the dramatic growing the dramatically growing renewable, that's the solar and wind. And wind, solar today, for instance, is 0.2% of the overall mix. And obviously it takes some time to build that up. We see absolutely dramatic growth. We see actually solar becoming between 6 and 16% by 2050. And that's absolutely stunningly dramatic growth, but still it's not enough to push the clean energy through to the extent that fossil fuels will be less than 60 to 75%. Renewables will be between 20 and 30% with dramatic growth rates in wind and sun. That's the way how we see it today. And I think that must obviously immediately ask the question, what does it mean for CO2? CO2, this is the IPCC graph, and the lower part here is the 2 degrees Celsius world, and our two scenarios are the two blue and orange lines. This is jazz, this is symphony, and you can see within the scenarios that we are considering, we see now with current technology, current policy and currently known rates of innovation on both those sides, we do not see the world converging to a 2 degrees Celsius future. Again, Paris later this year can change that to some extent. We haven't assumed that, and now I'm losing the... do I need to do something here? The computer is... I would like to press, I can't.
Of course, that's not tactile.
The computer is as shocked as all of us with the CO2 future. I can accept that. I wanted actually to go to the next slide and show you what it means for energy access. And energy access is the 1.2 billion today without energy access. We have also asked the question, how will it look in 2050? And we see in most of the regions, first the good news, in most of the regions energy access is actually solved by 2050. Not in Africa, not in sub-Saharan Africa, where we still will have between 300 and 500 million. Again, the good news, it's going down, but it's not going to be solved by 2050. And I think that again brings us back to policy, to the policy, and that's my third point, requirements. What do we need to do in policy? And I think the first statement is an obvious one. We need to make sure, and it has been said, we need to make sure that policy investment frameworks are simply robust. We need more than half a world GDP equivalent of investment over the next 2 decades in energy. That is a massive amount, and for that amount to go to all the places where it's needed, the political risk needs to be low. And we define the trilemma, the way we have defined the trilemma at the World Energy Council is nothing else than basically a tool to control political risk and bring it down. One word about this. We have fundamental policy groups in every society, in every government. One is a household. They want low prices. They want access to energy, and that's the equity dimension. If the government doesn't provide that, the next government will come in and do everything differently. A second group is industry, who wants high energy security, obviously also low prices. If the government doesn't deliver that, next government will be voted. That's called political risk again, and the government will do everything differently. And the last stakeholder group is obviously environmental groups. If you have it all dirty, and China is struggling in that context at the moment, then you have to shift it around. It costs you a lot. It's not an easy thing to do. And again, if you're not acting accordingly, then it's a challenge for the government again. And I think that's, in short, if you do not keep those three in a balance at all times, you're exposing yourself and your whole national framework to political risk. And that's the reason why we are advocating this trilemma, which is obviously also a sustainability trilemma. But we do measure, we do rate and rank countries in 129 countries. And this is just the example of Germany, who ranks BBB because it has a ranking in energy security, equity and sustainability, which is in the rather forefront, not totally upfront, otherwise it would be a AAA. But we would rank countries, and I think that's my third point now. Every single country's first job and the government's first job is to keep that framework, that ranking balanced. And the triple B is a very good balance still. It could be obviously higher up, it could be a triple A, but balance is good still in Germany. There is a good balance, and then obviously have it as high as possible. So with that, I think I've laid out first what keeps people awake at night, where do we see ourselves in 2050, and what can be done on a national level. And that leads me to conclusion. What are the missing areas where we need greater international collaboration and also governance efforts? First of all, the CO2 one is an obvious one. We can take this one off very easily. COP later this year is critical. Without clarity on the price future of CO2, uncertainty in energy will remain high, investments will flow below the expected rate, and that's simply an energy security downside. Universal access is as obvious as I made it as well. We are going in the right direction, but particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, without additional effort, by 2050 we will still see substantial energy access issues, so energy poverty. Third area, it has been mentioned, the effect, if you want to share, if you want to see dramatic growth rates in the clean energy space, technology needs to be traded as freely as possible, and we support obviously the WTO context, environmental goods and services context. And the only refinement I would like to make there is it's not only about energy efficiency and renewables, it's also, if you look at the energy outlook, it must also include clean gas, it must also include CCS, and yes, also nuclear type of technology. So our recommendation to WTO is to include all, to have no blindfold on any technology when it comes to low tariff and non-tariff barriers. Those should be eliminated for all the technologies. And then the next point is the regional integration point. Obviously, if you want to have trade at global and regional level, the first thing that needs to be in place and is not in most of the regions or is moving only very slowly, it's the regional integration point. Many of the regions, it's true for Latin America, it's true for Middle East, it's true for Asia, it's true even for Europe. The interconnection, the integration of networks is much smaller, much weaker than it should be, and this must be a regional effort and priority in every single region. And if you think about Europe, by the way, it's not only physical interconnection, it's also institutional integration. It means market design must match, etc. And that's obviously a very important point. Then the next one is distorting subsidies. We still have massive subsidies, the hundreds of billions every year that go into oil, gas, and also obviously in renewables. But for renewables, let me make it very clear, we are also taking the view once the renewable is no longer a niche technology, it should not fall into the subsidy regime, so just be very clear, we should also sunset renewable technologies as soon as they are no longer niche technologies, and that's clearly the case in many countries. And so overall, in order to encourage energy efficiency, subsidies must go down, and this is obviously an important element that is discussed under WTO. The important thing there is it must be done in a socially in acceptable way, the sunsetting of subsidies. Market design, my point number 6, market design solutions. The current markets in electricity are not set up. And you have mentioned before, we have gone from a peak oil to a marginal cost regime. Actually, with the majority of renewables with zero marginal costs in a system, a market cannot work based on marginal costs, and that's obviously a struggle, because if you have zero marginal cost, you cannot recuperate capital cost if you go with a marginal cost market design. And currently electricity markets are designed on a marginal cost basis, and there's massive challenges now in a number of places where simply backup capacity is not set up, storage capacity is not set up because there's capital requirements, and that capital is not paid off by marginal cost markets. So new market designs are required. And let me just add to that, it's not only true for electricity, this leaps over to the gas side. A gas infrastructure that suddenly shifts from gas as an energy role to a gas as a backup capacity role diminishes volumes and therefore increases the importance of also new solutions for gas infrastructure, capital funding. And so the market design solution is not something you can do in the most effective way, in a national way. It should be done on a regional, with regional approaches. Think of capacity markets. And so this is the point 6. And last but not least, the two technologies that we see, innovation is critical everywhere, but the two areas, it's true for business models, it's true for policies, it's true for technology. The two areas in technology that we highlight where innovation is most crucial is, first of all, storage, electrical storage, and second, the CCS area. So there's obviously greater coordination internationally. To give you an example, we have seen the solar price collapse from 4.7 to 0.6 dollar per watt peak in 5 years. That's over 80% collapse in only 5 years. It took, to give you the storage example, it took over 7 years to bring down by 50% the storage, the equivalent storage price. And that is a slow motion. We are still very expensive on the storage. If we want to see breakthrough, we need much greater collaboration also internationally. So those are the 5 critical points, and I would like to hand it back to the chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christoph. Okay, so that's really a set of incredibly rich presentations that go from the legal frameworks to the realities of a business and stakeholder perspective to the economics and the prospects going forward. So thank you all for excellent presentations. I would like to now open the floor. I see a number of people that are very knowledgeable on these issues in the room, and so let me just offer the floor to any of you that would like to discuss any of the issues that has been put forward. Okay. Okay, let me then take perhaps an initiative from the church here and ask a couple of questions that come to my mind. Of course, again, we've gone through an incredibly rich set of issues. One of the points that were made both by DG Azevedo as well as Ambassador Kuneralp has to do with the role of state-owned enterprises, both in energy security as well as in the development of renewable energy markets. And I'd like just to put that on the floor for as an issue that we may like to discuss as needing perhaps, again, some more, we need more information there, but also better understanding of how to deal with it from a framework's perspective. So that's one question I'll put on the floor. I see my colleague Johannes has raised the hand as well. Johannes, please.
Thank you, Ricardo, and thank you to all the speakers for a very rich body of knowledge and information that they have sought to impart to the representatives in the room. I just wish to pick up on perhaps 2 issues, if I may. One is with reference to the issue of regulations. I think it was Mr. Howard Chase who made reference to the importance of this, particularly for the private stakeholders, and how this can impact be bottlenecks in the form of investments and in the way that business is carried out by those who are proposing or in fact implementing projects in the energy sector. And perhaps it may be useful to expound on this issue. I'm not very familiar or conversant with the Energy Charter Treaty provisions, and I was trying to look very quickly at the provisions, for instance, on transit and on investments. And it seems to me that perhaps there is a need to highlight if there are existing provisions on this. And I make mention of this because if you look at the counterpart in the multilateral trading system of the WTO, we will find that there is scarce reference to within the border type of regulations that might affect or facilitate trade and investment in the energy sector. The point being, can the Energy Charter, insofar as this specific sector is concerned, take up the cudgels by trying to promote increased or better regulatory cooperation or coordination among countries so that the bottlenecks that domestic regulation, for instance, would result in terms of trying to facilitate trade and investment in the energy sector can be obviated. For instance, in my part of the world where I come from, in Asia, we have a number of countries which experience problems with bringing on stream energy to meet demand precisely because of regulatory requirements, be it in terms of documents, be it in terms of processes that have to be undertaken, which result in time lag. In the Philippines, for instance, there are regular power brownouts occurring now, and it, I think, redounds to the lack of appropriate regulatory disciplines. Is there something that the Energy Charter Treaty can do in this regard? Likewise, in terms of trying to facilitate trade and investment in renewable energy, I think regulations can also play a major role. It's not simply a matter of trying to open up markets through liberalization of trade and investment regimes, but also, I think, through appropriate regulatory coordination or cooperation or streamlining of these regulatory frameworks in host countries. The second point that I wanted to reference is on the matter of dispute settlement. I noted that in the Energy Charter Treaty, the experience has been that it has been more of investor-state disputes. I think the website refers to about 60 disputes on investor states and how these have been basically resolved through UNCTAD and ICTSD facilities. And there's only, I believe, one dispute involving states, and these have been resolved through diplomatic channels. Is there any possibility or overlap of rules insofar as the Energy Charter Treaty are concerned and WTO disciplines are concerned? And if there is any potential for conflict, how would these be resolved? Maybe that is more in the theoretical realm because that has never happened, but perhaps it would be useful to set some guidance on this. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Johannes. Those are two very good areas. Let me just add on dispute settlement, just as a thought that came to my mind as we listened to the presentations, that of course in the Energy Charter Treaty, you have the possibility of using third, we call it third party or external arbitration platforms. But the question I think that could be interesting to explore, and I honestly don't know if there's literature in that respect, is whether given the alignment between the Energy Charter Treaty and the WTO agreements, could it be going forward? Could it be possible to think about the use of the dispute settlement mechanism of the WTO in Energy Charter Treaty disputes? It's been proposed, and there's some analysis about the dispute settlement mechanism of the WTO providing services, say, for instance, in the case of regional trade agreements or other arrangements outside of the WTO. And so, again, it's a forward-looking question that probably requires a great deal of scrutiny before you can get there. But it goes to the issue of the effectiveness and the satisfactory performance of the scheme that you have today in the Energy Charter Treaty, and particularly on the question of use of external arbitration platforms, as I'd like to call it. There is a very rich discussion, and ICTSD is prompting more of that, on the reform of the international investment regime and what to do with respect to, again, the shortfalls that we may have there on arbitration and dispute resolution. So again, it would be interesting to explore better how to strengthen dispute settlement mechanism for trade and investment related to energy. So those are three questions for the moment that we have on the table: the state-owned enterprises, regulatory cooperation, dispute settlement. They're just small issues, as you see, and simple ones. Yes, give the floor.
Thank you. I'm Detlef Browns from the EU delegation to the WTO. I have two questions. The first one, going maybe to Ambassador Kuneralp. The DG has been speaking about the DDA and let's say the importance of finishing the round in order to free up the negotiating agenda in the future. Of course, he has been hinting at the possibility and the possibility and the need also to have a discussion about energy in this house. At the same time, Ambassador Kuneralp, you have been speaking about also about the need for having new rules in trade and energy, and you have mentioned that the Energy Charter, of course, would be one place to have, let's say, for a set of new trade and energy rules. How do you see the complementarity in the future, more specifically between both organizations? Is there, could there be a division of labor? Where do you see the specific advantages of both places in working out new rules? My second point goes to the presentation of Mr. Frei. By the way, very interesting. But I would just want to pick up on one point. You've been speaking about the subsidy reduction aspect. That was one of your five points at the end. But of course, the flip side of subsidies reductions is the addition of the cost of externalities for fossil fuels. Where do you see would this happen, and is there a right place to do that? Would this? Do you see any multilateral or international framework for that, or would we need to continue to have this more or less being done individually or nationally by countries? Thank you.
Thank you for those two questions, Detlef. Again, so we have 5 sets of questions. Let me come back to the panel, and then we may go again to the audience on those questions. And so just maybe I'll just offer the floor freely, and you choose on the 5 questions whether you'd like to take something up, and then start with Ambassador Kuneralp.
Thank you, Ricardo, and for the questions and the comments. And of course, I will try to answer them to the best of my ability. First, with respect to state enterprises, there is nothing in the Energy Charter Treaty that bans state enterprises. I think, and I don't have in front of me the text of Article 17 of the GATT, but when I look at at Article 22 of the treaty, which deals with state enterprises and privileged enterprises, I have a feeling that it reads it's very familiar So, and I suspect that if one was to compare it with Article 17 of the GATT, it's probably, if not identical, at least very similar. So it doesn't ban state enterprises as such. It simply requires them to act in accordance with the principles of the treaty, which means transparency, non-discrimination, and national treatment, and that kind of thing. And so no contracting party, is required to privatize state enterprises by being a member of the treaty. Now, of course, coming to regulations, of course, the crux of the Energy Charter Treaty is to try to create a regulatory environment which is transparent and predictable and non-discriminatory. These are the principles of the organization, and of course they apply not just to trade in energy products and energy-related products, but to investment, and that's why you have very detailed provisions in investment protection and promotion, and there is an investor-state dispute settlement mechanism which is attached to these provisions. What sort of relationship there could be between the WTO dispute settlement mechanism and the Energy Charter dispute settlement mechanism. Of course, as you rightly pointed out, all of the disputes, barring one, which was resolved by sort of mutual agreement. All other disputes have related to problems between companies and governments. In the WTO, of course, we don't have this investor-state type of dispute settlement, and only governments can take each other to court, as you know. So, what sort of relationship could be established between these two systems is something which is certainly worth examining. But I don't think at this stage, I have an answer unless the Secretary General has something to add on this. Now, with respect to what Detlev said, and of course, there is complementarity between the Energy Charter and the WTO, but as the Director General and ourselves have tried to explain this morning, the WTO is not as detailed in its rules that relate to energy as the Energy Charter, and to my mind, and you might, I hope you will, everyone will agree. The best way of enhancing the coordination and the complementarity between the two organizations, and the most direct way is to have as many members of the WTO, existing members of the WTO, joining the Energy Charter Treaty, acceding to the Energy Charter Treaty, and the whole purpose of developing this new international energy charter that we've been talking about this morning is precisely to facilitate this exercise, to encourage expansion to regions of the world where the energy charter in the past had not been active for reasons that I have mentioned, and we are already seeing results. Africa. There are several African countries that are in the process of preparations for accession to the treaty. We have a number of Latin American countries which have announced their intention to sign the charter, and we hope that the new charter, and we hope that this would be for them also a first step in the direction of accession to the treaty. So I think that this is the direction that needs to be taken, rather than trying to negotiate new rules here, there, or elsewhere. Thank you, Ricardo.
Yeah, thank you very much. Urban, please.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. I apologize myself because I had a bilateral meeting with Director General in the meantime, so I was not here and I couldn't probably answer to the all nuances of the questions, but I will try to comment on what I have heard since I returned from that meeting. I think the very important way is to understand how the dynamics of the Energy Charter process works in relation to the question how the Energy Charter could be useful for the in the Asian framework, how to help the countries in a different region like ASEAN or South Asian cooperation framework to cooperate to achieve this regulatory convergence, because we are what we are talking about is a convergence of the national regulatory framework, and we see it as a two-step process. First one, the countries which are subscribing for the Energy Charter process by signing the declaration, either the European Energy Charter or the new, hopefully, which will be adopted in Den Haag, International Energy Charter, will become a member of the family. This is not an obligation under the EC Energy Charter process to harmonize the regulation, but of course they are part of the process is the discussions, and they are exposed to the thoughts, to the way how the countries which represent the core constituency and core constituency for the Energy Charter Treaty are or contracting parties. So those countries which have adopted the Energy Charter Treaty, which is legally binding regulatory framework. So, in a first stage, this is just a light exposure. In the second phase, in those countries which decide to accede to the treaty, indeed, here we have a real regulatory convergence, because in a process of accession, each and every country has to go through the accession process. Together with the experts of the national level, as a secretariat, we are preparing the accession reports of those countries in investment climate and market structure, in regulatory compliance with Energy Charter Treaty, and in energy efficiency application. So by applying the Energy Charter Treaty requirement to those countries through the accession process, we see the real regulatory convergence. And of course, because of the Energy Charter process is a very feature of supporting regional cooperation, Energy Charter Treaty works the best when we have a regional approach. We have seen it in the Caspian region, let's say, in the early 90s when the Charter Treaty was there, and which actually promoted and enabled the oil and gas development of the Caspian region. Because before it was there was a fragmented market with no regulations and with no access to the global markets. So after the Charter Treaty was put onto the place, the countries in the region adopted the same regulatory framework, and the access to the cross-border cooperation, transit pipelines, and the same level of investment protection standards has been set in the whole region. And we know that geology was there, and the missing regulatory framework, when it was filled in and it enabled the development of the Caspian oil and gas. Back in the 90s, we have been in the very low oil price time. So it was a time of $10, $15 per barrel. Regarding to the dispute settlement, Energy Charter Treaty provides for the multiple dispute settlement mechanism. You mentioned ISDS, the investment state dispute settlements. Of course, we have the state-to-state dispute settlements mechanism. Then we have provisions for how to solve the transit disputes through the conciliation. And of course, we have the trade-related disputes. And I think here in WTO it's worth to focus on the trade-related disputes. The Energy Charter, for those members of the Energy Charter Treaty, and there are still at least 4 countries which are members of the ECT but not members of the WTO, they still have to apply the WTO standards in the trade and dispute settlements. For those countries, Energy Charter Treaty is a vehicle how to apply in any trade dispute with those countries WTO rules. For this, Energy Charter Secretariat maintains a roster of panelists in case of disputes, so we could call the people to create a panel for resolve the disputes according to the WTO rules, even for the not WTO members, which are ECT contracting parties. Regarding to the where we are moving, yes, we have started a discussion. Of course, as you correctly mentioned, and it's obvious from our website, the bulk of the dispute settlement cases are within the ISDS, between the investor-state dispute settlements. This is a unique feature of the Energy Charter Treaty, which is the only existing multilateral framework for investment protection. Of course, we are aware of the ongoing discussions. This is about the way how to modernize ISDS. We, at the Secretariat, we have prepared several proposals to our contracting parties. And I have to admit that Energy Charter Treaty, once it was drafted back in 90s, do not provide too much on the transparency, for example. According to the treaty, the contracting parties or parties in the dispute, they have no obligation to report. So we even don't know at the Secretariat how many cases have been filled, because there is a possibility that some disputes between the investor and states have kept out of the public domain. So we know about a couple of cases which are, what we know for sure that there are the cases but they're not in the public domain. It could happen that there's even more cases which have been simple out of our reach, because there is no obligation on the contracting parties to provide even a basic information about the ongoing disputes with investors. So we would like to address those issues. We are preparing the set of the transparency initiative within the Energy Charter. The second area where we are moving, which is also expressly allowed by the ECT but not developed at all, is the way how to dispute, how to solve the disputes through the mediation. Before actually entering to the arbitration, we very much believe that arbitration should be the last resort. And before that, we have to develop a certain framework or a process which will allow investors and the host government to solve the disputes amicably without ending in the arbitration, which is very costly, very time-consuming, and it has its own difficulties. So we have seen that some government, and this is very much linked also to the possibility or to the perception, public perception of the possible corruption in a dispute settlement. You could imagine the situation when investor has an odds with the government, and there is a dispute, and the governments are asked to settle the dispute without arbitration. So without a proper procedure, it will immediately bring a public perception whether everything went through accordingly and there is a net procedure. So we are trying now to propose contracting parties a procedure to which they could stick without being accused that they are doing something irregular when they are trying to set the dispute outside of arbitration, because this is something which the public officials usually have a fear of. And last question regarding to what kind of new trade rules we could set. Since 2012, we are in an active phase of the modernization of the Energy Charter process. And once the modernization of the Energy Charter will be over, the first phase of the modernizing the Energy Charter Declaration, we will enter into the second phase. We will propose to the contracting parties to have a closer look on the other rules, or including probably the trade-related rules, which has to be discussed within the Energy Charter constituency. What kind of modernization they are looking for, and certainly, as we have heard today, and we have just discussing with Director General Azevedo, that there is an obvious issue of addressing the energy-related problems in the WTO framework after post-Doha, in the post-Doha complex of questions, and what is the role and what is the place of the Energy Charter in this. So, Energy Charter Treaty provides for a very detailed regulation in energy, and which goes beyond trade, because the Energy Charter covers also issues related to the energy efficiency, issues like a key personnel, like investment protection, which is highly unlikely to be addressed in any foreseeable setting within the WTO, because they are falling out of the general scope of the WTO. So I think that we are entering, and this should be considering the modernization avenues of the Energy Charter, and which should be done in a close discussion with the contracting parties, which are at the same time members of the WTO, and the decision has to be done in the capitals, in which direction we will go, and certainly we will follow the decision of the member states. But we think that the Energy Charter Treaty provides for a very handful framework to address, and a compact one to address the energy-related issues. And here I would like to echo Ambassador Kuneralp's opinion that while one of the way ahead would be to invite and more countries to the Energy Charter framework, which will make the both constituency more compatible as they are today. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ermin. That's a good comprehensive response that gives us a good idea going forward. Could I take perhaps Howard first and then Christoph on comments on the questions that have been asked? And I have two more questions, one coming remote, and I know there's someone from the floor as well. Yes, please.
Thanks very much. On regulation, thank you. Regulation from a business perspective is clearly where the rubber hits the road of policy into real life and business performance, thus the fundamental importance of better regulation, as I described in all its forms, certainly not non-regulation. Just a side thought on that for my industry, the chemicals industry, we've put a lot of work in the context of TTIP, of course, into the regulatory cooperation chapter on regulatory cooperation on regulation of chemical safety and product safety. And it's clear there is huge economic and I think social welfare locked up in the potential for greater regulatory cooperation across the Atlantic within the TTIP context. You can see the prize. You're not going to get to that prize all in one go, but again, therefore, the processes of regulatory cooperation in the TTIP context will be tremendously important, where there's a real economic and welfare gain not at the end of that road, at each stage along that road. So I think your point about at the end, if I heard you correctly, I was thinking in terms of finally where do you get to the regulatory impact of the policy thinking is obviously hugely important. Just a sidebar there, of course, a crucial area, therefore, in the context of this discussion, as Christoph said, is energy market design, effectively, in the end, a regulatory issue. And again, it's clear that both the principles and the details of energy market design can actually have a profound impact on energy market behavior over actually not that long a period of time, and clearly some perverse effects, for instance, in Germany, where pro-renewable policies have in turn pushed high-carbon fuels, coal and lignite, into the market. I think just illustrates the sensitivity to energy market design. So that's clearly a crucially important subject. On dispute settlement, again, from personal experience, Secretary General Rusnak mentioned the importance of the Energy Charter framework in the development of Caspian pipeline infrastructure during the 1990s. I was certainly personally involved in that, and the existence of the ECT framework was clearly and demonstrably important at that time. Speaking personally, I've been involved in a number of discussions over the years about the potential for going to investor-to-state arbitration, and never actually got there. And I think again that illustrates the point. If the tool is there, then it concentrates the mind in terms of wanting what you really want, which is a workable settlement of the stakeholders involved. And there's a school of thought that says by the time you get to actual arbitration, to a degree, you've lost the trust and confidence that you need to carry on anyway within that operating situation. But the availability of the procedures is and has shown to be tremendously useful in a number of contexts. WTO ECT relationship, clearly, I'm not an expert there, but a couple of observations. Certainly in the ECT principles and provisions have proved to be very resilient in the energy area. And I think if you ask energy people to write down what would help in terms of international energy trade and investment, give or take, you get to what's written down in the principles of the Charter. And I think that became clear in a Russian-initiated exercise a few years ago. So what's in the Energy Charter Treaty at its core is seriously worth having in terms of promotion and protection of energy investment in all its forms. And similarly, representing a major global company, of course, the clear importance of the WTO framework, and that the WTO framework stays resilient just in its wider application. And certainly for my part and part of my company, we would like to see continued progress of WTO-inspired liberalisation, which is another way, I guess, of saying good luck with Doha and post-Doha, but it remains crucial. It remains of practical as well as diplomatic importance. Perhaps that's what I can say. And then finally, I think on the very good question of pricing in of externalities, and if I heard correctly, on regional versus global basis, I mean, in a sense, I have to go straight to the pragmatic answer, which is, I think the pragmatic answer is region by region, and therefore the whole point of regional carbon markets will need to be to try and leave room for them to stay roughly aligned, so that progressive development of regional carbon markets can give rise to something that at least arbitrages on a global basis. And frankly, that's pretty well how financial markets work as well, so maybe that's not a bad model to be aiming at. And just as a final thought, therefore, world governance, again on a pragmatic basis, what one might say that I would certainly say global politics and geopolitics at the moment is heading away from concepts of sort of global normalization towards a more of a regionalism and regional structure. I think that's reasonably clear, in which case a couple of immediate points. One, the importance of preserving the global frameworks we have, WTO and ECT amongst others, in a resilient form, because they're going to be increasingly important as we see the growing fragmentation, regionalization of global geopolitics. And again, the importance of a pragmatic approach in at least allowing and provisions for regions to talk to and work with each other rather than flying too far away. Thank you.
Thank you. Christoph?
Thank you. Perhaps just one brief comment to the national versus international. We have been very active in trying, for instance, at the COP process, to make the point very loud that an international agreement is obviously of critical importance, but without a trilemma approach or without a solid national framework, it's kind of, we're here in Switzerland, so we can talk about clocks. It's like winding up a clock without the clockwork being in place. And I think you need the clockwork to be in place for the winding up actually be meaningful. And I think that's really the key point why we believe our ultimate and first effort is on national frameworks. They need to be sophisticated. They need to be in sync with kind of what is feasible, and that's the trilemma. So that's a very brief kind of, I think, an order of priority kind of point. But then the point on subsidies, I think we need to make a distinction between the getting out of fossil fuel subsidies and the renewable subsidies. So let me go first quickly to getting, and your question was as well, what can be international, what should be national? And I think what I just said, probably you're expecting for me to say you should all do it nationally first, but actually it's interesting to see that in some regions, if you think again of the trilemma, and by the way, the subsidies of fossil fuel obviously has set up originally to address the energy affordability side, so the equity side. And it's well known that only about 5% of those subsidies, or less than 5% of those subsidies, really go to the energy poor, and the rest is wasted by the energy rich. And therefore it absolutely makes sense from every sense of the trilemma to actually get rid of the subsidy, but still ask a question, how can we maintain the objective in place to support the energy poor? And I think India has been an example of now as well accelerated actually example under the Modi government now, to show that one way of obviously if one hands over the amount instead of the subsidy, the amount to the person who uses the energy, what it takes up his bank accounts, and that was not an obvious thing in the rural India. Modi has accelerated the rollout of bank accounts for rural India, and I think just as an example, I think to show that innovative approaches that help specifically go after the energy poor is a first thing that obviously needs to be done nationally. But then the social acceptance of getting out of subsidy may very well be something that actually, if an entire region goes for it, may be more socially accepted. Think of Middle East, think of parts of Asia, think of possibly parts of Latin America, etc. If a region goes together, I think it's becoming much more socially acceptable, and I think that's very important to keep in mind. So this pragmatic approach that you pointed out may not be at total global level, but it may be at cluster, at peer country level, at kind of politically similar-minded level where population has similar kind of expectations to their government, and if those governments work together, I think it will tremendously help to actually achieve progress. So much about the fossil fuel, but then the renewables and the externality question. It's obviously again, and I've shown the example of Germany. I think it must be political feasible, and it must be economic as well. Even externalities have obviously a thing, and political feasible. If you look at Germany as the example, Germany is walking to a place where there is over 20 billion annual subsidy now, and going into the system and this has grown up to a speed that nobody expected. And in Germany today, the affordability issue is not yet high, but it's going up. We can measure it with the issues monitor, and we can measure it with the trilemma. The last I said, Germany is a triple B. Germany was the last A Germany lost was actually on the equity side, and it lost it because of this. And we see it on the issues monitor that the concern about affordability is not yet high in Germany, but it's going up. And look what happens in the UK. Miliband trying to run after the next election, saying let's freeze tariff type of things. Why? Because affordability is on the top of the agenda in the UK, and the same is true in other countries. So my point is that yes, externalities are very important. But first point is it has to be, if renewables are out of the niche, this has a social cost that is of critical importance that may vote out the government that put it in place and bring political risk into the equation that nobody wants. The worst for renewables and for clean energy is stop-and-go policies. And I think, again, this kind of situation may lead in stop-and-go policies, which are obviously the death of every healthy and good approach. And I think in conclusion, the mechanism that is built up in renewables, it's very of critical importance to set this up as something that is done to promote the technology, as long as it's a niche technology. Once you want to go after the externality, if the externality is CO2, the CO2 market is much better fit to do that than the subsidies behind the specific technology for the reasons that I've just mentioned. So that would be a long-winded, slightly complicated, but that's I think the perspective that WEC would give to those issues.
Thank you, Christoph. So I think I want to turn, before we go on with questions and answers, first to Joakim Reiter, who just joined us. Joakim is former ambassador of Sweden to the WTO and the new Deputy Secretary General of UNCTAD. So we're very happy to have you with us, Joakim. And while he takes the floor, let me just make a quick comment on the subsidy question, which is so daunting in many ways. Well, the first one is that you may have seen that this morning it has been announced that 8 countries will issue a call for action on fossil fuel subsidy reform. That would happen this afternoon in Washington at the World Bank, and that includes a number of countries that are here in the room: Norway and Sweden, Switzerland, but also Costa Rica. And I see Ambassador Álvaro Cedeño with us here. So you may want to refer to that, but it goes to the points that you were making before. It's about 580 or 600 million billion dollars that we have in subsidies on fossil fuels today. Then on the other side of that, the issue of subsidies and renewables that Christoph just referred to as well. Well, that's a question that was sent by Vina Jha earlier today on watching this dialogue remote, had to do in a way with the discussion that we had on state-owned enterprises as well, and the comments made by Ambassador Kuneralp. And well, many believe that in certain markets there's still a need for feed-in tariffs that may be designed in a way that they constitute a certain type of subsidy. When you think about reform of state-owned enterprises, particularly in the distribution of energy in many markets around the world, well, what is happening vis-a-vis the rules is that then those type of subsidies would probably become actionable, and so we have an issue there where by the nature of the reform that is happening in many markets through privatization of these type of entities, you actually would get into a place where the rules may start then biting, if you like, on those subsidies. But the question again of the effectiveness, the desirability of subsidies to promote the scale-up of renewables. I hear you well, but I think it continues to be a debate that we need to continue to explore. And with that, and I take the point that you made very very well about not only sunsetting what is not anymore niche technology, but also the issue both with fossil fuels as well as with this of doing it in a socially responsible, with a socially responsible approach, if you like. But I think that's actually a good leeway to then turn the floor to Ambassador Reiter, who's going to talk about the challenges for developing countries related to these gaps in the governance of trade and energy, or trading energy. Joakim, you get the floor.
Thank you very much, and thanks a lot for inviting me. I should start by paying tribute to the organizers, which are not only doing a great job having this, but it's great to see old friends as well. So it's a great pleasure for me to be back here, back in Geneva, to be here today, and to have the opportunity to participate in this session. I've been asked by the organizers in my new role as Deputy SG of UNCTAD to share with you my views on and the theme is the challenges for developing countries related to energy trade governance. But to understand the challenge of energy trade, one needs to understand the challenge of energy as such. And let me start by sharing some numbers to illustrate the energy challenge that we collectively are facing. Every day, the world's population increases by nearly 230,000 people. So that's like adding a city of the size of Geneva every 2 days. We may not notice it, but this is happening. And one of the reasons why we don't see it here, of course, is because most of the population increases happens elsewhere. They're happening in the developing world, not in Verbier, Gstaad, or in Chamonix, but they're happening in the developing world in countries like Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Philippines, just to mention a few. In addition to the population increase, every year millions of people move from rural to urban areas, where they use more electric appliances, cars, and demand more energy, legitimately so. Also every year, millions of people thankfully move out of poverty and join the middle class. So over the past couple of decades, due to population growth, urbanization, and rapid growing middle class, energy demand has skyrocketed. In no other place on Earth is this as prevalent as in emerging economies. Their energy demand has increased exponentially to fuel their dynamically growing economies. In fact, these economies account for 90% of the growth in energy demand since the year 2000. So despite the current problems in the global economy, we have witnessed an unprecedented rise in prosperity in the last 2 decades. This is a monumental achievement. But it's also this very fact of increased prosperity which creates a global challenge that we now have to face up to. This is what I would call a prosperity paradox. When prosperity grows, leading to increased energy demand and its consequent increase in CO2 emissions, this threatens to aggravate the climate change problem, which in turn compromises the prosperity that all nations legitimately strive for so hard. So this is the bad news. As we get richer, we compromise the well-being of future generations. But there's nothing new about this story. What is new is the sheer magnitude of the problem. There is a way out of this paradox, which is cleaner and sustainable energy, which is also usefully the topic of our discussion here today. In the post-2015 development agenda, an important focus is placed on broadening the use of cleaner and sustainable energy sources. Simply put, we need to decouple economic prosperity from CO2 emissions, so as not to compromise a country's ability to grow or the prosperity of current and future generations. Collectively, we must ensure a transition towards a cleaner and sustainable energy. And I'm convinced energy trade governance can play a very important role to help all countries, particularly developing countries, to achieve this transition. For us, for me, this transition implies addressing major challenges, and I'll highlight three. First, diversifying the future energy mix. Second, decoupling economic growth from greenhouse gas emissions. And third, designing multilateral and national energy policies, including for energy trade, in accordance with a coherent governance framework. So let me address each of the challenges I just mentioned. I will start with diversifying the future energy mix. Fossil-based energy sources continue to dominate the energy consumption of countries, with clean energy representing around 20% of global consumption. The International Energy Agency predicts by 2040, 25% of energy would come from clean sources such as solar, wind, and biofuels. This is perhaps encouraging, but falls far short of the scale of transition we need to achieve. It also shows that the transition from conventional to clean energy will be a long and difficult process. Therefore, we need more policy changes to diversify the energy matrix. Clean energy should represent a major share of global energy consumption in the next half of a century. In this context, biofuels represent one option for developing countries with the capacity to produce, use, and trade them. It is very easy to focus exclusively on large-scale operations here. But some small islands in the Pacific have, for example, also developed biofuels from coconut oils, as it is clean, relatively cheap, actually aromatic, and easy to extract. Opportunities exist, and all countries, regardless size or might, will have to creatively explore their respective endowments. Of course, major challenges remain in developing the biofuels industry. For instance, in setting environmental sustainability norms, tariffs, and subsidies, in better understanding the impact of biofuels production from first or second generation on land use and food security, or striking a better balance between large-scale energy crop production and traditional small-scale farming. We need to address these issues and respond to legitimate concerns as they exist if biofuels are to play a more important role in our future energy matrix. Let me now refer to the second challenge, decoupling economic growth from greenhouse gas emissions. The energy sector is responsible for by far the largest share of greenhouse gas emissions, about 26%. Therefore, to decouple these emissions from economic growth, it is crucial to find new energy sources from both conventional and clean sources that ensures availability, accessibility, and affordability of energy for all. This will in turn help sustaining high levels of economic growth. And there is a lot of untapped potential in this area. As noted by the president of the World Bank yesterday in an interview, Africa currently just exploits 1% of its hydroelectrical potential. Greater internationalization of energy policy and focus on clean energy can also provide the necessary push and mobilization resources for decoupling. A new climate agreement under the UNFCCC in Paris in December, but also the financing for development in July, should be used as important vehicles to this end. In the decoupling process, we are not alone. We have one ally, and that's technology. This technology is rapidly evolving and it's becoming more cost effective, but a lot is already available. One of the big challenges here is to spread those technological innovations from market to market, including developing countries and particularly LDCs. It is in the poorest countries where renewable technologies play the dual role of reducing emissions and also reducing energy poverty. Green technologies can go where electricity companies and high voltage grids cannot, namely to distant or isolated rural areas. We need to make sure that energy technology as an ally is available to all countries and peoples, not least the poorest among us. Diffusion of technology really matters, and as you know, trade is one of the most effective channels to diffuse technology. Countries can do their part by liberalizing trade in climate-friendly and energy-efficient goods. This can be done as part of the ongoing Doha negotiations or in a regional or plurilateral setting, or unilaterally. Within the UNFCCC, technology transfer is also on the agenda. Finally, I will now turn to the third and last challenge, where I will devote more time, and it's a rather complicated one, which is strengthening the multilateral and national energy trade governance. At present, there is no uniform or single multilateral framework on the governance of energy trade. There have been some ideas raised in recent years to have such a single agreement on energy within the WTO to regulate trade in energy in both goods and services and related measures such as subsidies, procurement, etc. And I think ICTSD has worked quite a lot in this area. These ideas are based on the recognition that the WTO can and already provides a multilateral framework for regulation of energy trade, or at least a number of aspects of it. In my view, this is an area that members may wish to explore following the closure of the Doha round. But they should then also consider the role of energy investment and energy competition policy, or the application of competition policy to energy, currently covered by, for example, the Energy Charter or the work by UNCTAD. Some steps can also already now be taken in this House and elsewhere. The WTO Doha agenda looks at liberalization of trade in environmental goods and services, including in energy sectors, or at liberalizing energy services sectors. The APEC initiative on liberalizing trade in tariffs in environmental goods and well, it's actually only environmental goods, and the agreement among some key countries are signs of growing awareness of the need to strengthen the governing framework on energy. These initiatives should be welcomed and consolidated. Most recent regional trade negotiations and agreements propose provisions on clean energy and energy efficiency. They provide another avenue to improve regulation and governance of energy trade, which can meaningfully encourage the development of clean energy production and trade. We need, of course, be aware that international initiatives will never be more coherent than national policies. Effective policy steps must be taken at home. And renewables are at an area that is profoundly shaped by government intervention in domestic markets. The industry, like fossil fuel, benefits from large public subsidies. The price of conventional energy significantly affects the incentives to invest in green energy and to produce it. Any attempt to scale up the use of green technologies will necessarily have to address the fossil fuel subsidies. Now is the perfect moment, given the recent drop in oil prices. Renewables are also protected by trade-related measures. These support systems are mostly based on the premise that countries want to pursue green energy and green jobs simultaneously to make a truly sustainable economy. But green jobs, as an industrial policy objective, can work against green energy in certain circumstances. Sometimes one has to choose what is more important. On top of it, attempts by policymakers to support green jobs has in some cases generated a wave of disputes in the area of renewable energy. It had also raised the question of the economic rationality, effectiveness, and legitimacy of such interventions. Let me give you one example. Some governments link local content requirements to subsidies or a taxation structure. Beyond the WTO legality of these requirements, what is their effectiveness from the perspective of seriously scaling up renewables? In this sense, a valid question is, does it make sense for governments to focus less on subsidizing production and more on subsidizing the consumption of renewable energy? Other countries make use of trade remedies and other types of border measures, which have the advantage, if I can put it like that, of being more transparent and applied at the border. But trade remedies create barriers to supply chain optimization. As you know, more than 40 cases on anti-dumping and countervailing duties have been initiated since 2008 on biofuels, solar energy, and wind energy products. In other words, various trade measures may fragment global markets for green technology, constraining economies of scale, increasing inefficiency, reducing innovation, and reducing the incentives for technology diffusion. This is a bad outcome for all, but particularly for the poorest developing countries. These countries also lack deep pockets and cannot afford to pursue inefficient and costly policies. In addition, these trade measures are at cross-purpose with national and international climate and environmental policies and could undermine the credibility of governments' commitment to address climate change negotiations. We have an important challenge ahead of us, addressing the prosperity paradox. The post-2015 development agenda aims at eradicating poverty from Earth. More and more people will have the fortune to join the middle class in the years to come, and their demand for energy will increase dramatically. This, plus the continuous increasing global population, will put enormous pressure on our energy systems. We need to respond accordingly, and we need to respond in a manner that is sustainable, in a manner that what we do today does not compromise our ability to prosper tomorrow. which means we need clean and renewable energy. And trade has the power to contribute to this goal. Trade can help transferring technology, can pave the way for investment to follow, to create governance and doing business platforms needed to foster the production and consumption of renewable energy. So as you see, in my view, trade can do a lot. And as you see, we can do a lot. But we need to do it together and ensure that trade is up to the challenge, which is still lacking behind. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Joakim, very much. And again, you were not here with us earlier in the morning, but you have been very good at targeting exactly the themes that we have been discussing from that development challenge perspective. So thanks for that. Let me then suggest we resume questions and answers, now taking into account, obviously, Ambassador Reiter's remarks. And I'd like to start by recognizing someone in the back who had asked for the floor earlier. Please.
Good morning. Thank you for this great insight. I believe this is crucial for the development of the new energy framework worldwide. I have 3 questions. With the shale gas revolution in North America and in Europe booming, with this revolution, how much is the treaty, the ECT, taking it into account? And the development, the second question will be the development of energy security in Eurasia has been vastly explained, and I would like to know what else is being done in South America, especially Mexico and Venezuela. And I would like, then my third question is how strong enough is ECT with geopolitical volatility, especially with the oil prices lowering and political tensions among countries? What can be done, or well, that's it. Thank you.
Could you identify yourself for us, please?
I am intern at the permanent mission to Mexico.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I had suggested that perhaps Ambassador Senior wanted to say something on the fossil fuels call, but if you think you'd like to take the floor, please.
Thank you very much.
And it's great to see you here.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. It has been very enlightening. I guess my reference to the fossil fuels will be towards the end of my comment. It is somehow eye-opening for us Costa Ricans to realize what has happened in our country in the last half a century when we started establishing and investing publicly and privately in renewable energy generation. We are approaching very soon 100% renewable energy matrix in our country. But apart from this achievement, in the last 50 years, we have addressed a serious deforestation issue at home. And as a result of that, we have managed to double the forest coverage we had 30 years ago. And in these same 30 years, we have managed to triple our domestic GDP. So I say that we find this eye-opening for ourselves because we realize that we have become an example of, if I may call it like this, regenerative development. We have grown economically and we have grown ecologically. I guess if we look at fossil fuels, technically speaking, from an ecological point of view, fossil fuels are renewable energy. The problem is that it takes 300 million years to renew them, and I don't think anyone is willing to make the case of such scenario planning long term. But in truth, I would say that referring to what Mr. Frei had to say, that with current policy and technology and innovation, we are not able to see a 2-degree increase scenario in the global average temperatures occurring, which is probably the core of my comment. Going back to Costa Rica, perhaps the critical factor of our latest success is a strong link between energy and environment. How do we bring this conversation, so rich and so dynamic and so full of information, to the conversation of ecology and natural resources and the capacity of ecosystems to restore those resources that at the same time become inputs to all industrial development worldwide? And if I may ask, may say, I believe that some of the negative externalities that our energy markets have an increasingly high cost from an ecological point of view, but they do not have a market price yet. So how can we give a price tag to those costs so that they reflect the urgency and the importance to recover the natural ecosystems? And finally, if I may finish with a question, because I know very little about carbon capturing and storage, but I wonder if there is anything more energy efficient and with greater positive impact on the ecosystems in terms of carbon capturing and storage than a tree, or even better, a forest. So thank you very much.
Thank you for those comments and those questions. I know that Ambassador Reiter also has to run off to another meeting, but I wanted to give him an opportunity to maybe comment on what has been said. If you think that there's any comment that you'd like to but and also, yes, if there are any specific questions on his remarks, we can use his time before he flies off. Okay, well, if not, we will excuse you, Joakim, and thank you very much for being with us. We had some questions dealing with the question of from geopolitics to shale gas, as well as this new set of remarks and issues that have been brought up by Ambassador Cedeño, particularly with respect to the climate change challenge that we have ahead. Is there anyone else who'd like to add anything at this time to the panel? And if not, let me just turn to the panel and see if someone would like to respond on these issues. Christoph?
Perhaps just to confirm that I fully agree on the trees being the most effective CCS. I think what sometimes gets lost in the discussion is simply the orders of magnitude. We are talking about 30 gigatons of CO2 every year, and I think it's just mind-boggling if you try to put that into relationship with anything else that we are used to deal with. Humanity consumes about 1.5 gigatons of steel every year, eats 2.4 gigatons of grains every year, and builds 3.4 gigatons of cement. And even if you build all the mega cities and have lunch while doing so with CO2, you don't make a dent into the CO2, and the same is true for the forests. I think, just we need to keep this in the relationship it is. It's a massive amount of CO2 out there, and we should not restrain ourselves from looking at this at the scale that it actually represents.
Howard, please.
Yeah, thank you, Christoph. I think it's the necessity of that sort of grasp of the realism, and again the paradoxes or the trilemmas, because of course the bringing of thankfully hundreds of millions of people out of absolute poverty implies this sort of price. In terms of the scale of this, here's another question. I think there's been some discussion here of fossil fuel subsidies. I was just asking myself, is that gross or net of fossil fuel revenues? Because fossil fuels are also a huge source, of course, of revenues around the world, both in primary production, even at $60 a barrel, almost oil and gas production is paying quite significant upstream taxation. And then, of course, it's taxed very heavily in many economies at point of sale as well. And generally speaking, here we're looking at post-tax fossil fuel costs compared with pre-tax costs of other forms of energy. So I think possibly the impact of taxation, both direct and indirect, is something that needs to be factored very carefully into the equation, because of course that also has a huge impact on the public finances, where hydrocarbon originated taxation, even in mature economies, is often the second or third most important source of revenues in terms of excise and customs duties, etc. So again, but I don't mean that to be a negative comment, I think, but just illustrating again the real scale and challenge of the issues we have here. I think if I may, on Costa Rica first, it pays happily very well to understand and compete with your natural attributes, and it seems to me Costa Rica's done that very successfully over a long period of time and identified its policy interests and its competitive attributes and played very strongly to them. And there's certainly a lesson in there on pricing of externalities. Of course, one can price in externalities directly in the form of markets, such as emissions trading, or, of course, through regulatory policy. The regulatory policy still prices in the externality, but you don't necessarily see it in such a transparent way. But it's worth trying to understand the indicators. So if you look at a somewhat different indicator for, say, solar or wind energy, which is not cost to market, but cost of CO2 ton avoided, then actually the cost of solar, especially in wind, is still very high in terms of pricing out tons of CO2, although they're coming down. I don't, again, mean that in a negative sense, but those costs are of the order of $100 per ton at least of CO2 avoided. I think higher still for solar energy, whereas you can get rid of a huge amount of CO2 at very low cost, $1 to $5 a ton, or even negative costs through energy efficiency and insulation. So energy efficient insulation's not terribly policy sort of vibrant, but actually it does the job extremely well. And generally speaking, you can get a value multiplier, i.e. of original cost to a long life cycle benefit of at least 6 to 1, if not 10 to 1, on the hydrocarbon benefit just from insulating a building more effectively than they're traditionally done. So I think, again, understanding the implied costs of regulatory frameworks and then what are the right criteria to rank regulatory policies in terms of the most effective policies is, again, perhaps plays back to the regulatory question, is a very useful place to look. Thank you.
Thank you, Howard. So there were some specific questions asked about the Energy Charter Treaty, and particularly it's the issue of shale gas and how or whether you're taking this into account, as well as with respect to the new South American membership in a way, or non-members yet, and the participation of some of these countries in the negotiation of the new International Energy Charter. As I take it, that's really the way that you may want to look at that question, and whether you intend to address with your new conception of energy security. Questions of energy security in other regions, which probably goes into the core of some of your comments before. So, Urban?
Okay. Thank you very much, Ricardo. Well, regarding to the shale gas and other new technologies, including renewables, Energy Charter Treaty was negotiated early 90s and was signed in 1994. The treaty as such is technologically neutral, so it doesn't pay any special attention to any particular technology. What is important that it covers, for example, investment, all kind of investments in fossil, nuclear, renewables, and it's open to any new technologies which may come. So about energy efficiency, which plays a very important part of the Energy Charter process, this is very much in the core of the Energy Charter. So it was clear in the early 90s that the best way how to reduce the energy bill was to save and to use energy more efficiently. So this is a part of the Energy Charter Treaty. So here we have quite a strong say. Regarding to the shale gas, obviously shale gas was not on the agenda in early 90s, but because of the neutrality, technological neutrality of the Energy Charter Treaty, all investment, including the shale gas, are covered by the ECT in case of done within the ECT territories. Regarding to the or work or cooperation within the geographical scope of Latin America, last year we had several openings or meetings with countries, especially those coming from or which are cooperating in the Pacific Alliance. So we have been suggesting and introducing an energy charter to those countries. We have seen an interest, a growing interest from Latin American countries. Some of those countries may be present in Den Haag in the conference and signing up to the new International Energy Charter Declaration, which will open the way for a more closer engagement between the Secretariat in those countries in the whole sphere of Energy Charter. And regarding to the geopolitical realities, of course, we are not immune of those. So if anything is happening on the broader geopolitical scale, it affects energy cooperation, it affects energy charter, of course. This goes without saying. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Urban. I think I'd like to maybe move towards wrapping up and just mention a couple of rescue a couple of themes that were highlighted by Joakim Reiter in his remarks. One is the question of remedies and how disproportionate the clean energy technologies are represented in the use of trade remedial actions, so anti-dumping as well as countervailing subsidy investigations in most major markets today, and whether this is perhaps a signal of a lack of other frameworks, for instance, on competition policy that should be acting in a better way to regulate markets. And so again, we've been doing some work on that and promoting that there's more attention on the frameworks paid to the question of competition policy rules. Then the other one is with respect to local content requirements associated or otherwise to renewable energy schemes, particularly, but in also the proliferation and the use of local content requirements generally in this sector. And whether we have a question there of a non-observance of rules. We have very clear rules in the WTO about local content requirements, or perhaps the inadequacy of the rules, and then therefore the question needs to be looked into carefully. Is it an issue of better rules, more specific rules for this sector, for instance, with respect to local content requirements, or what is it really that we have in front of us? But it's clear from studies that we have done also that the use of local content requirements is increasing, and that it is particularly prevalent in the energy sector. So that's another topic that I think is quite interesting. And then obviously the emphasis that he made on development and the question of access and addressing the very, again, daunting challenge of the energy poor is one that needs to be kept in mind. So I think we've gone through a very rich set of, again, presentations on the frameworks that we have in place today to address what is going to be increasingly a concern of policymakers and societies, given by, again, demographics and development, but also by the other challenges that we have in front of us, particularly the question of moving to a low carbon economy. The existence of an instrument such as the Energy Charter and the Energy Charter Treaty provides an approach on which governments can build to try to resolve some of these issues that I think it's very clearly stated during the session. The WTO, even if it doesn't really in its development, in its evolution, if it hasn't tackled energy specifically in its development of rules, it affects in its rule book in positive and probably not necessarily enabling ways different aspects of the again of the capacity of governments to take policies and measures to address these questions as we go forward. Director General Azevedo was very clear on the need to think better about the adequacy of the rules and what we need in this field, whether in complement to the instruments such as the International Charter Treaty, or in the areas where the WTO specifically has competitive advantages. There's much more that needs to be done to really move into a world where we would have the kind of frameworks that could deal with the trilemmas that Christoph Frei has put forward, and the concerns that we have heard from the industry and as well as from the development side, the geopolitics and the trends that we have today in markets, and the new normal that was identified with the volatility or high volatility of prices for energy. So we will continue to work on these issues at ICTSD. You will continue to see us, particularly during 2015, and as we go towards COP21 on climate change, you will continue to see a great deal of effort on our part to try to ensure that governments come up with some deliverable that will contribute to COP21, perhaps through the EGA negotiations, the Environmental Goods Agreement. It will be really a game changer if there was a possibility to put on the table already in December some harvest from those negotiations, something that could ideally then translate into a larger effort in this House through this Bali Work Program and the mandate on environmental goods and services that you have in this House. So we'll continue to emphasize that and to work with the governments that are in the EGA as well as those that are not there, but that we think that have advantages to contribute and possibilities to contribute to those negotiations. And then going forward, we look also forward to that possibility of working with the various actors in this space and in the energy space in particular to try to, again, help and support governments in formulating and crafting better and more enabling frameworks on trade and investment as they relate to energy. So thank you all very much, and thank you all our presenters for being with us today. Thanks.